Well, hello world, it's Terry Marshall yet again, coming to you as we have done in the past from Mission. And if you don't know it, Mission is a fairly small community. I think it's about 36,000 people. But for the last 28 years, they've put on a folk music festival which is really considered to be one of the gems of the folk music scene. And they have the power to attract some incredibly well-known performers. I'm happy to say one of them sitting with me right now, and that is the wonderful Sylvia Tyson. Sylvia, welcome to Mission. I hope you've been having a good time so far.
Yes, well, we had a bit of a slow start, but we're up to full speed now.
Well, the weather didn't exactly cooperate. I want to go back a little bit. I think it's a matter of record that you come from a very musical family, and so you obviously were musically aware from a young age, but that doesn't automatically mean that you're going to follow a musical career. What was it that actually hooked you into music, and in particular into folk music?
Well, as you say, I had a musical family. My mother was classically trained, and my father also played piano and pipe organ. And so I sort of grew up with it, but I grew up with all kinds of music. I mean, the small town I came from, what you heard was pretty well country music, but we were also 60 miles from Detroit. So I listened to all the late night Detroit R&B stations as well, so fairly eclectic listening. But when I was in high school, I got into English traditional music, mainly like the Cecil Sharp collection, that sort of thing. Mainly because I had an interest in English literature. So.
Well, that's interesting because I grew up with that tradition also, and I recollect that a lot of the songs were dealing with mine disasters and how hard it was working in the mills, or you'd have the song about the soldier or sailor that goes away, gives half a token to his girlfriend, then comes back 5 years later in disguise and pays court to her. Uh-huh. And if, and she says, well, I'm being loyal to my boyfriend. And he says, well, look, it's me.
Yeah, right.
I've always thought that at that point she should punch him in the nose and send him on his way lamenting.
Where were you?
Exactly. So that is a far cry from the sort of music you actually started writing. So what age did you realize you had this facility for writing songs?
Well, I did all traditional music to begin with, certainly for the first three or 4 years. But working with my ex-husband, Ian, we spent quite a lot of time in New York, and one of the people we were hanging out with was Bob Dylan, who was writing 4 or 5 songs a day at that point. And we just thought, well, if he can do it, we can do it. It was not, oddly enough, something that had occurred to us before then. And I think that most people at that time, they sort of thought songs just materialized. They had no idea where they really came from. So we were fortunate to be in at the beginning of the singer-songwriter explosion, in effect.
I noticed that, as a matter of record, that when you started to write, you actually shut yourself away, sort of isolated yourself from other singers and songwriters. I would have thought that took an act of great courage, but also great confidence. Did it seem like that to you?
Not really. I guess I didn't want to sound like anybody else. And because I'm sort of a natural mimic, I thought I would avoid that pitfall by sort of cutting myself off and just developing my own thing, my own music. And the music that I brought to Toronto when I came there was, I certainly had songs out of books mainly that nobody else knew or did. So my repertoire was totally different, and that was a real advantage.
I had the thought that as a young and beginning songwriter, not every song you come up with is a gem, but I wondered if there are any hidden gems from those early days that have never made it into the public venue for one reason or another.
Probably not. I'm a bit lazy. I tend to be a sort of work-to-rule writer, and if I need to have material for an album, I'll write it. And I mean, I'll collect ideas that I will later develop into songs, but I'm not a terribly prolific writer.
I was thinking that, again, in some of your former interviews, you've talked about a huge amount of traveling that you did when you were starting out, you and Ian. And everybody seems to think that that's a glamorous way to live. I've traveled a bit myself, and if you think it's glamorous, try living out of a suitcase for weeks on end. Did you actually find it tough, or was it just fun at the time?
Well, I was a lot younger, so I didn't get as tired as quickly back then. Uh, I enjoyed it. We played a lot of college concerts. Usually, if we were lucky, a theater, but usually a gymnasium. Sometimes with the only sound system available being the speakers for the basketball games that were in the ceiling. So it was a little rough at times.
Yes, yeah.
But it really was a great experience. And then we started doing major concerts. It developed quite nicely. So.
I don't want to, by any means, just to dismiss the career that you had with Ian, both publicly and privately. I figure that it's been written about so often, if people are really interested in that part, they can look it up. But one thing that did catch my attention from that era was you made a comment that at one point you felt that some of your record labels, or your record label, was putting, I think you described it as gentle pressure on you to maybe change something in your performance to make you a little bit more popular in their vein. I think you said as a result of that, you felt that the recordings were a little bit flawed. Did you think that the Suits, as they were then, ever learn anything from that? Because I know that you did.
We had started off on Vanguard, and they, to give them credit, although they had their flaws, never told us what to record. They just recorded it. When we started dealing with major labels, there's always pressure with a major label to do something that they think is going to be more commercial. The problem being that those people that are telling you to do something more commercial are not musicians. And, they love the idea of being involved in the record business and the music business, but most of them don't have a clue.
I've been heard to observe on camera before now that I wonder how long it will be before the Suits recognize that you don't actually have to repair something which isn't broken in the first place.
Well, I think that what they fail to recognize is that the arts, not just music, but the arts in general, it's full of imponderables. Nobody knows what catches the public interest, and trying to second guess what people will like is pretty futile.
When I learned that there was the possibility of doing this interview, I did a little bit of, I went to the internet and looked at some of your more recent concerts. And I hope this doesn't sound like a backhanded compliment, but I was very impressed with how good your voice is. And I'm going to preface that by saying I'm actually 3 years older than you are, so I feel, but my question is, how do you manage to keep your voice in such good trim?
Well, it's like working out, you build the vocal muscles in the same way that you do the rest of the body. It really just is, use it or lose it, I guess is what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, I know you've got time pressures, so I want to just do a quick spin forward, if we can, to your current venture, which is with Quartet.
Uh-huh.
Was it generally you just discovered each other at that Songwriters in the Round conference, or did you know each other's work before then?
We knew each other before, but we had this opportunity to do this show. It was an afternoon show at a venue called Harbourfront in Toronto, and they wanted women songwriters in the round, but because we all knew each other, we thought we'd get together and rehearse. We had musicians we were working with, so we needed to let them know what we were doing as well. And we realized that not only did we know each other, we knew each other's material too, and we just started singing along and playing along on each other's material, and it started to sound really good. So
I'd second that, yeah. So, the inevitable last question, what is next for Sylvia Tyson?
Well, probably more of the same. I published my first novel about 3 years ago, and I've just finished a second one. And so I'm going to be kind of concentrated on that for a while. But I have, concert work coming up. I have a maritime tour coming up, and a U.S. tour coming up with an old friend, Scarlett Rivera, who was the fiddle player on the Bob Dylan Rolling Thunder Review.
Well, I noticed that Quartet is booked through to at least December and probably beyond. I just wanted to say it's been a great pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you. I always love conversations in which I learn something, so this has been something of a highlight for me. Thank you very much for doing this and making it happen.
Well, thank you, and I wish you well with the program.
Thank you.
Please welcome Sylvia Tyson.
Good evening. On this lovely evening, this song is about the great old North American custom of cruising on Saturday night. It's dedicated to all the boys I went to high school with. 1, 2, 3, 4. Saturday night in a one-horse town, watching the cars cruising up and down, and it's the same old thing. It's the same old thing. Big farm boys in their daddy's trucks, and high-heel girls with their hair pinned up, and it's the same old thing. It's the same old thing. You're all wound up and no place to go, only one movie and you've seen the show. Everyone you see is someone you know, and it's more of the same old thing. Pool hall punks out of luck and money, out on the sidewalk pitching pennies. It's the same old thing. It's the same old thing. A&W driving fights, sit on a fender and